Welcome to the first episode of a segment that I'm calling Chapter 1. Every time we do one of these episodes, I will pick a vampire book that has been indie published on Amazon, and then I will get the author onto a Zoom call, and I will read out loud the first chapter of their vampire book, having no idea what it's going to be like, having not read it ahead of time. So, bear that in mind. So here we go with our very first Chapter 1. So, since this is the first time that we're doing this, I decided to call up a friend of mine who I've known for many, many years now, and that is my friend Bradley Upton. Brad,
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
Sure, no problem.
So, Brad has written a vampire book called Blood Stakes, and this is now a series, right?
Yes, there are two that I've published. I'm working on the third now.
Okay, excellent. So we are going to read Chapter 1 of his first book. But before we get into that, there's just a little bit of extra vampire pedigree that I have to call out for Brad, because this is actually how we met. Back in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, back before there was a YouTube. I know it's hard to remember back that far, but there was a time.
Yep.
And there was a show on called Dark Commandos, which was a show that was, I believe the tagline was, "What if Michael Bay directed a vampire movie?" And
I think that was it.
And Brad was one of the stars of it. So he was one of the four dark commandos who were vampires, working for the U.S. State Department. And so I had watched this show, absolutely in love with it because duh. And then I was at Comic-Con that following year, and Dark Commandos actually had a booth. And I went up to them and went up to Brad, and I was like, "Oh my God, you played Dreyfus. I love your character on the show." And and he was like, "Sweet dude, thanks."
The best ever.
So when he said, "Oh yeah, I'm writing a book," I was like, "That's great." And when he was like, "It's about vampires," I was like, "Oh damn, let me get you on this show I'm putting together so that I can read your book." So before we start reading, is there anything that we should know?
Well, the book is set in 1987, so it doesn't have the universal phone which gets in the way or can solve any problem at any time. You know, it's maps, it's the internet, it's a phone, and it just always made me crazy when you're watching a movie and the cell phone breaks or it's out of battery power or, you know, that type of stuff, just because the writers have to contrive a reason for people not to know that their monster is in the house. And
Okay.
so having it in 87 just creates problems that people had, you know?
I see. Okay. All right.
That's a good start.
All right. I like that. That's fabulous.
Actually, this will be the first time I've ever heard anybody speak it aloud.
So there is no audiobook of this. So
No.
So I'm it. I'm sorry,
Oh.
Brad. I'm sorry that this is the audio introduction of your book, but
Well,
here we go.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
So Chapter 1 of Blood Stakes by Bradley Upton. The chapter name is Blood and Ice. By the way, before we get started, I know I just keep teasing this, but if at any point I'm reading a character and you're like, maybe a little more serious or maybe a little more funny, or if you need to give me any direction, feel free at any point to be like, whoa, that's not right at all.
A lot of the inspiration for the character of Ice was sort of like after watching The Lost Boys, I went, "Oh, they're kind of cool." So,
Oh, this is
no,
going to
sure,
be real easy then.
yeah.
All right, here we go. Cindy sat in the bar next to the noisy casino, sipping her Mai Tai and surveying the crowded dance floor for possible companions for the evening. She was tall, made taller by spiked heels, her long legs curled to one side of the bar stool. She wore a tight black miniskirt that hugged the curves of her hips and half-top accentuated her toned upper body. She spent an hour getting her hair just so, and the lack of interesting potential partners was discouraging for the amount of effort involved to create the beauty before them. Nothing new could be seen as far as her piercing green eyes could ascertain. There were the regular patrons of the bar, visitors from out of town looking for excitement or fortune on the Las Vegas Strip, down on their luck gamblers drowning their sorrows, frat boys being decadent on Daddy's American Express, nervous husbands in town for business, hoping to cheat on their wives without getting caught, their wedding rings in their pocket, but the telltale dent in the flesh of the left finger was a dead giveaway. If something didn't change soon, she would try another nightclub. The evening was still early by Las Vegas standards. For 15 minutes, she tactlessly shrugged off the attentions of half a dozen men who had the courage to approach a goddess like her and tactfully turned down a few women while she finished her drink. Cindy didn't mind the fairer sex, but she wanted something masculine tonight. The night had been a waste so far. She looked at her watch. It was only 1 a.m, and there was still time to make it to another club to see what sport she could hunt up. She got up and was headed to the door when a man entered. He chatted in a friendly manner with the doorman for a moment before entering the club. Cindy stopped and looked at him. He looked interesting. She walked back to her bar stool and perched herself, butt scooted back on the seat, back slightly arched, showing off her ample assets. He was tall and leanly muscular, with stylishly disheveled shoulder-length black hair. His face was clean-shaven, angular, and very boyish looking. Dark brown eyes regarded the activity in the bar very passively, as if he had seen everything and done everything. Slowly, he walked around the dance floor, the pulsing colored lights making his face red, blue, green, yellow. He was searching, a hunter on the prowl, like she was. Cindy was determined to have him for her evening's entertainment. The young man's eyes scanned the room. He was assessing everything he looked upon. He noticed Cindy staring at him as he passed by. He stopped and smiled politely, knowingly. Cindy smiled back, somewhat shyly, but with an element of conscious seduction. The game was on. At the right moment, she looked down and away. He was still standing there when she looked back. He walked confidently to the bar next to Cindy and leaned his elbows on the padded rail. The bartender saw him and immediately came over, leaving a customer hanging. The bartender leaned forward and the young man whispered in his ear. He nodded and quickly returned with a wine glass. The condensation on the clear glass indicated the dark contents were cold. The man turned, rested his back against the bar, and sipped the contents of the wine glass. "Hi," he purred in a voice smooth as silk. He was talking to Cindy, but didn't turn to face her. "My friends call me Iceman. Ice for short. What's your name?" She was a bit flustered by his presence. "I'm Cindy." In an effort to gain power back, she took the drink from his hand and tried a sip. It was something very cold and slightly bitter. She had tasted it before, but she couldn't place where. "Iceman. Strange name. Are you a huge fan of Top Gun?" That's good. Ice turned to face her. He was tall. She liked that. "A great movie, but no. An ex-girlfriend called me that because my body temperature is lower than most people's." To emphasize the point, he touched the back of his hand gently to her cheek. She shuddered for a moment and nearly spilled his drink. He retrieved the glass from her. "I see what she means. Poor circulation. It's why my skin is so pale." "What do you do, Iceman?" Cindy was subtle and teasing. her technique which had worked on men many times before. I write stories, I drink, I quote Shakespeare. Oh, really? Give me some of the bard. Look in thy glass, and tell the face thou viewest, now is the time that face should form another, whose fresh repair if thou not renewest, thou dost beguile the world, unbless some mother. The words flowed easily from Ice's mouth, with the skill of a classically trained actor. It's the start of Shakespeare's third sonnet. Do you know the rest, or just enough to impress women in bars? Cindy asked. The whole thing, of course. Ice seemed irked by her question. What are the two last lines? But if thou live, remembered not be, die single, and thine image dies with thee. That took a morbid turn, Cindy frowned. Not really. Shakespeare is telling a young woman to go out and get laid, make babies so his beautiful face will carry on to the next generation. Go out and get laid, huh? Cindy smiled wickedly. You trying to tell me something? I don't know what you're talking about. Ice smiled back innocently. You have culture, Iceman. But can you dance? Of course. His steady gaze burned into her as if he could read her soul. Let's see if that's true. Come dance with me. Is that my only choice? For now it is. She grasped his hand and led him to the dance floor. The music pulsed so loudly she could feel the bass throbbing in her chest. Or maybe it was the pounding, the pounding was her heart. The room temperature seemed to rise and the smell of sweat, perfume, and cologne were thick in the air. Multicolored lights flashed to the beat, illuminating the heads of the bobbing dancers. The instant Ice's foot touched the dance floor, he started moving to the rhythm. Cindy was surprised to see how well he danced. He was graceful, powerful, masculine, and in complete command of his body. His movements coincided very well with hers. It was like they had been dancing together for years. If he danced so well, she wondered how he would be in bed. For dancing, sex, and rock and roll were, subliminally, sexually, the same thing. After 5 songs, Cindy grew tired and suggested they sit out a few dances. She had worked up a sweat while Ice appeared dry as a bone. They found a small table in the shadows of the bar. She molded herself to his side and they spoke in quiet tones. Why don't we go somewhere quieter? Ice suggested in her ear. What do you have in mind? Cindy smiled knowingly. She wanted the same thing he did. But there was still a game to play. Whatever you want, he stated earnestly. Good. Come with me. She stood up from the table, pressing her body close to his. I live alone. She turned and walked away. She knew he would be following her. There was no reason to look back for confirmation. Oh, so far so good. There's a little time break here. I'm going to have a sip of tea.
Okay, no problem.
All right. The ride to her apartment was quick. Ice didn't protest, didn't suggest he'd drive. He just went along with her plan. Cindy wasn't breaking laws, but she was anxious to get home. Once inside her apartment, moments after the door shut, they kissed passionately. Feverishly, they undressed each other, breaking the kiss momentarily when they needed to strip off some difficult article of clothing, only to resume with more fire. Their tongues met and coiled, the burn of her mouth against his, tempering their carnal desire. Hands roamed each other's body, enjoying the firmness of the flesh encountered. Cindy marveled at the softness of his touch, the coolness of his skin, raised goosebumps as he caressed her. Gently, effortlessly, he lifted her. She nestled into his chest as he carried her in his strong arms to the bedroom. He placed her on the bed as one who is carrying a baby might. Cindy slowly kissed her way down his body toward his manhood when he stopped her. His cool hand turned her head so they were looking in each other's eyes. No, he said softly as he drew her face close to his. Let me do all the work. Just lay back and enjoy yourself. Cindy acquiesced, as at that moment she would have agreed to almost any suggestion he had. Ice kissed her neck and slowly, gradually moved down her torso. Her hot body being pleasured by his cool one created sensations unlike anything she had ever felt. She was not unaccustomed to what might be considered kinky sex. There were silk ropes, a blindfold, and a flogger in the bottom drawer of her dresser, as well as various devices both battery-powered and non. Cindy was a hedonist and embraced pleasure, but this was unusual. There were no tools or toys, just one exceptional man. It was very intense. Ice moved back up and kissed her on the lips as he entered her. She thrust upward to meet his incessant motion. Yes, he was as good in bed as he had been on the dance floor, maybe better. He seemed to know instinctively how she would move and what would please her. Ice rolled her over so she was on top. From this position, he watched the rise and fall of her breasts, the flush spreading over her body as she indulged in her own pleasure. When she came, she collapsed onto his chest. Her hands played with his long hair. Her lips gently caressed his neck. He smiled at the irony briefly as she nuzzled his neck. Ice reciprocated and started kissing her neck in return. He could sense the jugular vein pulsing with blood under his lips. 2 sharp fangs bit slowly into her throat. Cindy felt the quick, sharp pain where Ice was kissing her. After a few seconds, her heartbeat started to race wildly, matching the frightening pace of Ice's own heart. Her whole being seemed to cry out in ecstasy she had never known possible. Ice started thrusting again, even though the pleasure they both felt came from something other than sex. Soon Ice had had his fill. He didn't really require much blood. There was a larder in Las Vegas which kept him well fed, so he never had to kill to stay alive. Cindy was far too nice a girl to bleed to death. She had fulfilled 2 carnal urges inside him, blood and sex. He withdrew from her and rolled out of bed. She lay delirious with a glazed look in her eyes and a smile on her lips. Ice leaned down and his tongue flickered over the bite on her neck. The motion cleaned away the last of the blood and closed up the wound, so all that could be seen was 2 small red marks. She wouldn't die from the blood loss, but she might look a little pale for a week. He dressed quietly. He gazed at her sleeping nude form for a few moments, then covered her with the sheets. Ice smiled. Cindy wanted to use him to quench her carnal desires. Instead, he used her to quench an even stronger, more dangerous desire. His handsome face became reflective, his eyes distant. He leaned down, kissed her on the lips one last time, and whispered in her ear. Like a ghost, he left her apartment, no trace of him left behind. Cindy woke in the late morning. She was tired but content, with no real recollection of what had happened the night before. How had she gotten home? There was a half memory of a handsome face and hard body. Was it real or a dream? From his perch at the pulpit, Father Bryant could see the congregants clearly. There was light to augment the general lighting inside the church. Not a spotlight, but an addition to make him stand out a bit from the background and to give him light to read. Can't read a hymnal or do a reading in the dark. There were tall windows down the sides of the church showing religious scenes in muted stained glass. The congregation filled up the pews at St. Peter's every Mass. His flock was faithful. They usually showed up even in the most inclement weather. It was mid-October. There wasn't much snow on the ground, so he would have an audience until the weather changed and Colorado ski season kicked in. Colorado, eh?
Yep.
He was deep into the homily for the morning Mass. He had done Mass 1,000 times from the pulpit since his mentor and friend died. Father Sean Ryan, it's a good name, had been a force of nature at St. Peter's. He'd built the Gothic-styled church from the ground up. It had the look and feel of antiquity, but the styling was by design. As the castle at Disneyland was inspired by Mad Ludwig's magnificent construct in Germany, St. Peter's was inspired by Chartres and Notre Dame, but on a budget. St. Peter's had been built only 31 years before, in 1956, with the intention to copy the soaring grandeur of European cathedrals, but the money available was only enough to give it the flavor. The essence of Gothic architecture was well done, though no flying buttresses supported the walls, and with modern building materials they weren't needed. The one thing Father Ryan insisted on was a large rose window of stained glass over the oversized double-door entrance. When the light hit it in the early morning, it blazed, sending shards of color over the interior of the church. On paper, Father Bryant was a bit young to be leading a parish, but with the sudden death of his mentor 5 years earlier, he took over the day-to-day functions of the church. The bishop, seeing the smooth transition after he took over, let Father Bryant stay in charge. He was tall and fit, though priestly vestments could hide an overweight body quite easily. His face looked younger than his age, clean-shaven with a shock of unruly brown hair, which he seldom did everything he tried to make it do so. He kept it cut short. He had heard some of the women in the parish called him Father What-a-Waste. Never to his face, of course. But people told him secrets outside the confessional, too. This is fun.
Glad you like it.
Yeah. The members of the church almost always sat in the same pews, usually on the same side of the church. Only at the big holidays might they need to find another place to sit. All the lapsed Catholics came back at Christmas, Lent, and Easter. The confessionals were busy during Lent, as the people wanted to confess before the traditional rising of Jesus from the dead. On a random Sunday, crowds were never a problem at St. Peter's. Attendance was generally half to three-quarters full. Another thing St. Peter's had similar to a Gothic church was size. It had a large footprint on the parcel of land, taking up a third of the total plot. Next to the church was the priest's residence. It was a comfortable house, but lacked the Gothic styling of the church. From the pulpit, Father Bryant saw the usual crowd. They came to church with startling regularity. The median age was mid-40s to 50. Most had been coming to the church since they were children, and now they brought their own kids in to join the congregation. The random young didn't walk into a church anymore, not on their own. They had to grow up in the Catholic faith. Rarely did anyone come looking for it. As he spoke the homily, he looked into the faces of his crowd. There were the devout, the listening, and the bored. Children rocked restlessly, bored by the sermon, and were admonished by their parents to pay attention. St. Peter's didn't have a crying room at the back. Noisy children were taken into the lobby area under the seldom-used choir seats at the back. The Shelton boy, dark-haired and completely uninterested in the show before him, was reading a Spider-Man comic book. He didn't even try to hide it behind a hymnal. They would have had to have a chat at some point about proper church conduct. The repetition of the service, the call and response to his prompts, it was second nature to the crowd. Anyone new could pick it up quickly. The hymns were led by the choir master, though only about 1 in 10 really sung. Most people mumbled, many because they don't sing in public, many because they have stage fright or don't want to be noticed. Many had been taught by society not to sing or talk too loudly. With the help of the sound system, the singing, incoherent, sibilant buzzing of the crowd was usually drowned out. Nonetheless, he plodded through the sermon. By sticking to the familiar forms of the oceanic nature of ceremony, gave the watching crowd solace. The difficult situations of life had simple answers. There were hymns, there were readings, the standing, the sitting. Kneeling was second nature as well. The repetition, the ritual was reassuring. It was all familiar and made the crowd content. The whole ceremony created a level of familiarity and comfort for people who needed comfort food. It was God's mac and cheese. That's amazing. Inwardly, Father Bryant sighed. His life in the priesthood had become less and less satisfying. He didn't think he was helping people. His concentration sometimes lagged when doing even the most simple tasks. Things he had done 1,000 times seemed meaningless. The repetition of services made it simple to mask his distracted nature. His mind would wander to the past and the choices he made, which changed his world. The girl he left behind to join the priesthood, the close friends who treated him differently despite having grown up together. Even the strength of the calling he had when he was young had changed. He had lost it. He didn't know when, but it seemed it was most certainly gone. His passion for the priesthood didn't leave all at once. It wasn't a thunderclap leaving a void. It was the rush of water over sandstone, slowly wearing away the body of his calling. It was distressing. But the people who worshipped at St. Peter's would never know. He had enough experience and empathy to fake it. After Mass, Father Bryant stood outside and chatted with the people as they left. People praised his efforts and made comments telling him how they were moved. He always took the words graciously, though he sometimes didn't feel like he deserved it. When the crowd cleared up, he walked to the sacristy and took off the vestments and hung them up. Underneath was the typical black shirt with the collar and black pants of a priest, his everyday costume. He walked to his home next to the large looming church. Wearily, he moved into the living room and sat down in a large soft chair. He closed his eyes and nodded off. And chapter 2 is called The Visitor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was chapter 1 of Blood Stakes by Bradley Upton. Okay, very interesting. So we've got, is it safe to say that that Ice and Father Bryant are the two main characters of the book, or are they just part of a larger ensemble?
Father Bryant is, Ice is part of the vampires that are in the book, but he's not the main antagonist for vampires.
Okay. Very
What I was trying to do with that is, you're familiar with Anne Rice? Silly question.
That's an adorable question, Brad.
Isn't it?
I may have heard of Mrs. Rice and some of her musings.
Well, I remember reading, Interview with the Vampire and Vampire Lestat, and then after that, they became sexless vampire gods. So the equipment doesn't work. They pine for, I don't know what the heck they pine for, but I was just wanting to show that my vampires can fuck.
Okay. Well, mission accomplished for sure. So then, based on this first chapter and all of that, are we looking at a book that is a sort of an erotic sexual tale, or is this?
No, it's I don't know. Okay, it's a supernatural adventure. John ends up in Vegas hunting vampires.
Oh. Okay, so Father Bryant is going to be our vampire hunter.
Yes, because the visitor sets up him on a path that leads him to Las Vegas and embroiled with a bunch of vampires.
Okay.
I don't call it horror. I know that people call vampire books horror. No, it's more of a supernatural adventure. It's kind of like Indiana Jones and the Fangs of Doom. Without being there's no
that should go on the outside cover, actually. So some just immediate thoughts off the top of my head, things that I really liked about it. I dig the fact that your vampire, assumedly vampires, are they all? Do they all have kind of the same power set, or?
They're all pretty much the same power set. There are some that are older that are probably more powerful, but it's not like somebody can do this and then another person does this. It's not like disparate powers.
Gotcha. I dug the whole being able to drink from several different people. You don't have to drain one person dry and leave a bloodless corpse behind for detectives to wonder about.
You've read Salem, maybe?
Have I read what?
Salem's Lot, the Stephen King.
I'm going to embarrass myself here. No, I've downloaded the audiobook. It is in my queue. It's next up, but I haven't read it yet. I've seen the movie, the made-for-TV movie.
Yeah, I remember it was David Soul and Lance Kerwin. Wow, IMDb. I got about halfway through that and put it down just because the vampires were doing stupid things, and basically every person that the vampire drank from became a vampire, and exponentially in about 3 months the entire world is vampires and you have no food. And
yeah, that's always been a bit of a problem of mine for the much older tales. It's like that can't sustain itself.
the vampire moves to a small town that has 100 people. You turn your entire food into your, I don't know, fledgling vampire slaves, and there's nothing to eat. Go to New York, go to Vegas, go to Los Angeles, Chicago. Go where there's food.
Gotcha. And I noticed that you use the idea of the vampire can bite their victim and then lick the wound clean, like healed back up again. Where did you pick that up from?
Yeah, I just came up with it because if you act like if you puncture a vein, the heart pumping will just keep it going, and if you puncture the jugular, it doesn't really stop.
It's interesting to hear your reasoning for that, having sort of come up with that in a void. I've seen that in a couple of other places, not the least of which Vampire the Masquerade, the game, has that as a.
I've never played, actually.
I totally believe that, and this is one of those things that I can completely believe there are, you know, separate evolutions of that idea, because it's a problem that needs to be solved just for logic's sake in writing.
Yeah.
So that's really cool to see that you came up with that.
Well, I've done a lot of reading of vampire novels and stuff, and everybody comes up kind of with their own mythos, their own sort of powers and creature and what they can do and they can't do. And so I basically came up with what I wanted to do. And I tried to do things that I've never seen anybody do with a vampire character.
Oh, really? So we have that to look forward to in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, while we're on the subject, without giving away anything, can you tell us some of the things that we do have to look forward to? And not even necessarily for this book, but for the entire series.
Well, for this book, in this book, John gets paired up with Las Vegas PD policewoman, and she helps him go vampire hunting, though it's a bit of a task to convince her that vampires are real. She sort of goes along with it until, okay, there's a vampire. And she saves his ass kind of a few times, actually.
All right. And as we roll into, so currently book 2 is available on Amazon.
Yes, book 2 is available on Amazon. That one I put in Rome at the Vatican.
Oh, damn. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I've had a tendency. The third one is set in China, because I was in China last year in February. So I've been to the Vatican, and so it's easier places I've been. I can do the smell, the sights, the you know, the ambiance. And so I did the Vatican just because I needed a different place for him to be. He was having him do something else, and then he runs into a very big problem, and he has to do something about it.
It's good. Don't give away any more than that. Otherwise, that's perfect. No, that level of vagueness is perfect.
Because otherwise, you blow the whole thing.
Exactly. That's fabulous. So let's talk about. Well, let me ask this just to close out this topic. Does this feel like it's going to be a 3-book series, or does it feel like this is going to go longer than that?
I could continue, and someone suggested I could rate the previous tales of like the vampires that are in this one.
And that is you on the cover, right?
Oh yeah, that's me on the cover. When I was doing the cover for this, I had an idea that I sketched up for my cover artist, and since I don't know Photoshop, it involved like John and Maggie, the policewoman, and then a vampire face, and then Las Vegas background. And she goes, "This is about 30 to 50 layers of Photoshop. Let's make this a little easier." And I said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" And she said, "I like face. We could just make that the image, and then we just decided to do it as a wrapper. It's got
nice.
my eye and a fang on the spine, which is cool.
That is cool. Yeah, that's super cool.
And second, I did that with Vera Vanguard, friend, cosplayer, and San Diego Comic-Con Film School patron as well. So it's her face. And for the third book, I need to find a Chinese actress with fangs, because it's in China. And the antagonist, villain, whatever you want to call it, is a female vampire. So yeah.
All right.
So basically, I stumbled onto what's kind of a cool concept for a cover. It was just, this is a lot of work. Let's do something simple, and it worked.
That's great. Well, no, I mean the simplest stuff can certainly be the most eye-catching as well. I mean, like I remember I was just watching the documentary about Vampire the Masquerade, and they were talking about how right before they went to publish, they needed a cover for the main rule book, and they had somebody do a piece of artwork that had like all of the ideas for the game in it. Like there was a long-haired vampire in the foreground, and in the background was like a city with like an off-ramp of a freeway, and there was like a helicopter up in the sky, and there was a motorcycle on fire and somebody shooting down. And like they looked at it and they're like, this is ridiculous. Like this is trying to say way too much. And then they just took a photograph of a rose on a piece of green marble, and they're like, that's it. Like that gets the entire idea across in mood. Let's talk for just a minute here about sort of what the inspiration was for this book, for this series.
Okay. When I was in college, I knew I wrote, because this is actually the first book. This is actually the second book I wrote. The first book was just garbage, because I wrote it longhand in high school. It's one of those things you just like don't know what you're doing, things like that. And so he asked me to write him a one act for a directing class he was doing. And I was like, all right, that's interesting. Yeah, exactly. I was listening to Sting's Dream of the Blue Turtles, and there's a song on it called Moon Over Bourbon Street, which was inspired by Interview with the Vampire. And there's a line: the brim of my hat hides the eyes of a beast. I have the face of a sinner, but the hands of a priest. And so I went, priest, vampire. And, went with it from there.
What a great place to draw that inspiration from. That's fabulous.
So I wrote it as a short story. I gave it to him to read. He came back the next day going, that's really cool. You should do something with this. I dropped the class. So
that's terrible advice. I'm leaving.
So I finished college, and then after I saw Lost Boys, I was like, I have a vampire thing I could tell. Because
all right,
Lost Boys was one of the first movies that ever had like fun vampires.
Yeah.
Sleep all day, party all night, never grow old, and never die. It's fun to be a vampire.
Yep.
So, and then after that came Near Dark, and that was gritty vampires, very gritty, but it was just, I was writing a fun vampire book for me.
Tell us a little bit about the process of writing the book. Did the entire story just smack you right in the face, or did you was it the characters that sort of came first?
I wrote this one so long ago, I don't remember exactly. I didn't write it in linear fashion. I wrote it sort of piecemeal.
Mm-hmm.
I would come up with an idea for a scene, and then I would write the scene, and then go, I need to get from here to here. So I'd figure out how to bridge that. And I did sort of the same thing with the second book. I started off with a first chapter, and I was talking with a friend of mine, and I said, I don't know where to go. And she went, how about this? And then that one kind of smacked me in the face, but I still didn't write it in a linear fashion because I needed to get the parts of it out of my brain that were inspired. With the third book that I'm rewriting and editing right now, I started in the middle because I had a really excellent middle. I finished the book, and then I went back and did the front.
Excellent. That's
So
fantastic.
I don't plot it. I do it by the seat of my pants. So that it's pantsing or plotting. You know, I don't know how most writers do it, but that's what works for me.
So, so just one or two more questions for you. Were there any surprises for you over the course of writing it? Things that you weren't expecting, characters that took you off in a different direction, that kind of thing?
Not really for the first one. I kind of know what I wanted for the first one. The second one went off in a little bit of a different direction, or at least focus-wise. The third one, I, started with a very big event and went to its logical conclusion, but, it wasn't something I had planned on doing. It was just, I needed to, ratchet up the danger in the game.
Okay. No, that's fair. That's fair.
It's like Die Hard 1 is the one thing, and then Die Hard 2, 3, 4, 15, just keeps going on.
There was no Die Hard after number 2, Brad. Sorry. I feel very strongly about that. Okay, so I have a quick little battery of questions I call the final 5 that I ask to everybody who I have on, and they just go like this. So answer whatever comes first to mind. First question: what was your entry point into the vampire genre?
Probably Dracula. Saturday
Which
morning.
one?
Bela Lugosi, Dracula.
All right.
Because in Phoenix, they had this show on Saturday mornings at 10:30 on Channel 5 called World Beyond, and they would show Dracula, Frankenstein, Creatures of the Black Lagoon, Godzilla, King Kong, classic sort of.
That is fantastic.
Science fiction horror stuff. So basically Dracula.
That's awesome. Okay, question number 2. What is your favorite thing to eat for breakfast?
My favorite thing to eat for breakfast? Probably bacon. Just a big pile of bacon.
All right. Okay, it sounds healthy.
I do it a lot. It'll kill you.
Excellent. Do you have any habits or superstitions while you're writing?
Well, for a while, I didn't think I'd be able to write at my apartment just because it's easy to just fuck off and do other shit. But I was going to the Burbank Library to sit in a little cubby and then focus, which is why they have an acknowledgement in the acknowledgement section, just because it's quiet. It's easy to get distracted by other books, but if you sit in the thing, you can just sit and work. But with the third one, if I'm going every day in November to the library, it was just easier to write from home.
Gotcha. So it'll be interesting to see how the third book differs from the first two, and we can blame that all on your apartment versus the library.
Well, it's very different from the first two, but I don't know if it's the apartment. I think that was me.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see. Okay. So question number 4. If you could talk to any other vampire creator, what would you tell them, or what would you ask them about?
Well, like Fred Saberhagen. Have you ever read his Thorned and Holmes Dracula File and all those? Because he took classic Draculas and classic Sherlock Holmes and mixed them together and made it work.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I wish he was still alive. It would be really interesting to be able to interview him.
Mm-hmm.
Because he did. You're right. He wrote a lot of sort of classic Dracula stories.
Mm-hmm. He didn't necessarily write it like Dracula, because I did read the book, but he had the ethos of him, and he also caught the way Holmes was, just a quirky cocaine addict.
Very cool. All right, final question: who was your Dracula?
Oh, you mean like in the movies or that type of stuff?
It's sort of like, who is your James Bond?
Oh,
Which actor?
huh. Bela Lugosi was the first. Frank Langella was pretty cool when he climbed up the side of the castle. Have you seen the one on Netflix?
Yeah,
That
with Claes Bang.
that was just funky as hell, which was fun. I don't really know. I guess Lugosi, you know.
Okay, no, that's
Before
fair. That's
before he
fair.
was running around like this with a cape over his arm.
Yeah, no, that's a classic pick. Okay, so Brad, thank you very much for letting me wander my way through your first chapter.
No,
If
you did a great
people,
read. You really did a great read. I was
oh,
I
thank
was
you.
surprised because most people don't sight read that well.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. I'll take the compliment. Where can people get your book?
It is available on Amazon Books. You can either search my name, Bradley Upton, which is probably the easiest, or you can look up Blood Stakes, which is the first book. Blood Vendetta is the second book, and I think the third one might be called Blood Malice. I don't know. I'm still working on a title.
That's all right. There's no hurry.
Well, the thing is, with vampire books or a lot of titles, if you Google the name or something, I mean, the title of the first one was originally Blood. There was about 38 blood hunts that I found listed on Amazon Books. And I was like, I need something different. So and I went with Blood Stakes because of Vegas and Stake Through the Heart.
Oh man, I didn't even catch that. I didn't even catch the symbolism of that. That's
Yeah,
good.
I should have checked Blood Vendetta because there were quite a few Blood Vendettas, but you know, have like Mac Bullen Blood Vendetta or something. But,
Right.
you know.
Mac Bolin. Yes. It's definitely showing some age there.
I've read a lot of pulp novels like Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard and shit like that. So
All
that's where I
right.
get words that my editor was like, Stygian, really? What the fuck is
Why are you using the word cyclopean so much?
yeah, Cyclopean, I can put that in.
That's awesome. Well,
Right.
Brad, thank you very much for being with us here, and thanks for letting us explore the first chapter of your book. We look forward to reading the rest.
Thank you. I had a good time.
All right.
Okay.
Take care of yourself, my man.
All right. See ya.
And there we are, our very first chapter 1. Special thanks to Brad for being brave enough to be the person to go first. If you have a vampire book that you would like to have read on this channel, then there is a link below that will take you to a video that explains how the whole process works. But otherwise, this has been a lot of fun. I look forward to reading the words of a lot more vampire creators with you. So we'll see you next time.